Bonjour, good day. We'll be continuing as a party, New Democrats will be continuing to fight to make sure the fiscal update is an opportunity to tackle inflation, particularly as it impacts people because they're seeing the cost of living go up. So we want to frame this fiscal update as an opportunity to see the Liberal government put in place concrete steps to help people out who are struggling as the cost of everyday items continues to go up. Particularly housing is one of the biggest drivers of inflation, and we want to see real steps to tackle the increase in housing prices across the country. And as the former Bank of Canada governor stated, the federal government does play a role and has a role to play in tackling the cost of housing. We agree. There are many things that this government can do, some of which they announced they wanted to do in the campaign. We want to see them actually take that action. So we're looking forward to seeing that in the fiscal update next week. In addition, there's other measures to lower the cost of living for people. Some immediate things we can do that are within our power federally. We know people spend a lot of money, some of the highest prices in the world on cell phone and internet fees. There is a way for us to lower that, which will help families out who are feeling the squeeze. We want to see real concrete steps taken to support people in this difficult time, and that's what New Democrats will be fighting for. Donc, avec les mises à jour économiques, on pense que c'est une opportunité, c'est une occasion pour le gouvernement fédéral de présenter un plan pour aider les familles et pour faire face à l'inflation, parce que l'inflation augmente le coût de la vie et les gens font face à beaucoup de pression à cause de ça. C'est plus en plus difficile de rejoindre les deux bouts. Et de notre part, ce qu'on veut faire, ce qu'on veut voir, c'est des actions concrètes pour aider les familles dans ce temps difficile. On sait que l'inflation frappe fort pour les travailleurs et travailleuses, les gens avec des faibles revenus. Mais pour les autres riches, ce n'est pas un problème, c'est une occasion de gagner plus de profit. Donc, nous sommes la partie des travailleurs et travailleuses, des gens qui ont besoin d'aide. Et c'est exactement ce qu'on va pousser ce gouvernement à faire. On sait qu'avec le coût du logement, la crise du logement, c'est un élément de cette inflation où le gouvernement fédéral, libéral, peut jouer un rôle à réduire les coûts. Et finalement, ce qu'on veut voir, c'est des actions concrètes pour immédiatement aider les familles dans ces temps difficiles. Un exemple, c'est de réduire les coûts des services cellulaires et Internet. C'est quelque chose qu'on peut faire tout de suite. C'est dans notre compétence, dans la juridiction fédérale, et ça peut vraiment aider les familles. Donc, ce sont des exemples de la sorte des actions qu'on veut voir que ce gouvernement prend dans le temps qui s'en vient pour aider les familles. With that, I'm ready for any questions. Je suis prêt pour vos questions. Thanks.
Matter?
I think it's on y'all.
Sweet. So the block this morning laid out. Sorry. Yes, that works too. That works too. Okay. Rookie mistakes all around. Thank you, guys. So the block laid out 3 very specific proposals they're looking for to get their support on C2 this morning. I know you and some of your caucus mates have talked about a number of things you're looking for from C2, but I'm just wondering if you have a list of 3 or however many proposals that would get your support on C2.
You're speaking like specifically about like the paid sick leave provisions, like what we want to see changed in that?
Yes.
Well, we've long fought for paid sick leave. This is something that New Democrats called for over the past 18 months. During the pandemic, we pushed for over 22 times. So 22 times I asked the Prime Minister to expand on paid sick leave. We believe it's fundamental, it's essential. And 22 times the Prime Minister said no each time I asked to either expand it or put in a program or to bring in federal supports. He kept on saying no. I said no to workers. And so this is something that New Democrats have been pushing for, and we're encouraged to see the fact that it is moving forward. We think that 10 days of paid federal sick leave is vital. I spoke to some workers on the way here to Ottawa, and they said this would make a big difference in our lives. We can't take the time off that we need when we get sick, and with COVID and with all the challenges presented, it was really hard on a lot of people. So this would make a big difference, and it would set the stage, leadership to encourage other provinces to follow suit with legislated paid sick leave. So this is something we support, and we've called for it. In fact, this would be a victory that New Democrats have obtained for Canadians, another one showing that we can actually get things done that will make people's lives better. So we support it. And in terms of the details, we've looked over the principles of 10 paid sick leave. We support. We want to see additionally supports down the road to work with provinces to deliver a program that's long lasting, so that everyone in this country has access to paid sick leave, and we want to see action on that as well.
So shifting gears a bit to the Afghan motion that'll come for a vote later today. There's the Conservative main motion, and then there's the block amendment to it, and there will be a vote on the block amendment first. And I'm wondering, A, if you support the main Conservative motion, and then B, if you also support the block amendment.
On this, I stated, and it should be known that we believe very clearly in the principle that there needs to be accountability. A lot of concerns were raised and they were ignored. We want to know why that happened. And these are really valid questions, legitimate questions. People are deeply concerned. Why is it that when military officials raise concerns about allies not being able to use the existing process, the existing system, why was none of that advice heeded? Why did the existing system continue? Specific concerns that were raised that in a time of crisis, making people fill out an online form is not going to work. This was raised, and it proved to be the case. People could not access the application or the process to get evacuated. So it didn't work. And then Canada was caught flat-footed, and we were not able to evacuate people that put their life on the line for us, who are now in peril. These are very serious questions, and we want to see them answered. So we support the principle. Our team is still working on some details around the vote, and we'll let you know as soon as we can.
Bonjour, M. Singh, Boris Proulx du Devoir. C'est pas clair du tout. Le vote est tout à l'heure, si j'ai bien compris, dans quelques minutes, là, ou après la période de questions. Vous savez toujours pas si vous allez voter pour ou contre la création d'un comité sur l'Afghanistan?
On va vous donner, vous allez savoir notre décision bientôt. Donc, on est en train de vérifier quelque chose et on va vous allez voir le résultat bientôt.
Le premier ministre, juste à l'étage, vient d'annoncer que le Canada va faire un boycottage diplomatique des Jeux olympiques de Pékin. Avez-vous une réaction pour ça? Est-ce que c'était la bonne décision à prendre?
Oui. Hier, j'ai dit que c'était une bonne décision. Les États-Unis ont dit la même chose et on a appuyé cette décision. Yesterday, I said that the United States had indicated that they were going to go ahead with a diplomatic boycott, and I think this is a good decision today.
I'm Mrs. Singh, David Thurton from CBC News. Very good to see you. I just wanted to ask you about a petition that's circulating among some grassroots NDP members. At least 2 of your MPs have signed it. It says that we are angered, the petition says, we are angered by the BC NDP government's actions in Wet'suwet'en and distressed by the federal NDP's response. Do you support your members and your MPs who have signed on to this petition? Are you considering signing on as well?
So, for some context, I absolutely, along with so many Canadians, were angered and frustrated when we saw the police, the RCMP, militarized, breaking down doors with Indigenous women inside, the violence of arrests, and the presence of a militarized police in dealing with racialized and Indigenous people. That's something that frustrated me, angered me, absolutely. When we look at what's going on in the Wet'suwet'en territory, I've been to the community. I've met with hereditary chiefs recently and in the past. I've met with elected nations along the coastal gas link pathway and as well as in the Wet'suwet'en territory. I've met with workers. I've met with people in Wet'suwet'en, and I've met with the Band Council. And having met with people, spoken with them, it's clear to me that there isn't a clear consensus. There is a lot of different views, and I see at the heart of this the impacts of colonialism. on undermining a community's ability to have governance systems that bring people together and make decisions. And where we're at right now is quite complex, and the impacts on people are real, and it's hard to say what the right thing to do is to move forward. Having met with people on the ground, I don't know the answers. I know that we need to support, though, communities in having a system of governance to come up with those answers. And it certainly doesn't help when we've got militarized RCMP arresting people. That doesn't help, and certainly hurts the efforts we need to actually see real reconciliation. There's a lot more work that needs to be done, and I see that.
So from what I've just heard from you and the past statements that you've made in the past, it's very clear that you have strong views about what the RCMP is doing on the ground, if I'm understanding you correctly, Mr. Singh. But what I don't understand is, I guess, are you going to join some of your MPs and some of your grassroots members in calling out the BC government? Because from what I understand of the issue, the reason the RCMP is in there is because of John Horgan, right? And he has the power to change that situation. So what do you have to say about that? Are you going to go further than what you've just said and call out your BC counterpart for what they are and not doing to call off this militarized police force, as you call it?
Well, this is completely within the federal jurisdiction. The mandate of the RCMP, their use of force protocols, their de-escalation or lack thereof. 2 years ago, Justin Trudeau took a knee at a Black Lives Matter protest. And at the time, people wondered, who is he taking a knee for? He is the prime minister of this country. He could set an example by establishing what good policing looks like. And what we've seen since is complete inaction. No steps taken to do anything to reform the RCMP, which is fully within the federal jurisdiction in terms of its governance. And that, to me, is a complete lack of leadership, particularly when we've seen countless examples of the RCMP using force against Indigenous people and racialized people. So we've raised this concern numerous times. We're going to continue to raise those concerns. We've seen no action on the part of Mr. Trudeau, and we're going to continue to push to see a reform of the RCMP and their use of force, because it means that racialized people and Indigenous people continue to be the victims of brutality, and that has to stop.
Opérateur, avons-nous des questions au téléphone? Do we have questions on the phone?
Thank you, merci. The first question is from Mary Brooke from Island Social Trends. Please go ahead.
Hello, Mr. Singh. Today, the bloc leader came out in opposition specifically to the GIS clawback, which is something, of course, your party's been doing for months. Just wondering how you think this positions the success of Bill C2 going through, and then also any specific remedies that you think should be done for seniors in the meantime, like some sort of short-term Christmas bonus to get them through, and are you proposing full repayment of the GIS that hasn't been paid this year, or just partial?
I really appreciate the question. We chatted a lot in our caucus today about the impacts of the clawbacks to both GIS and child benefit. We have stories across the country of families that are on the brink, who are already struggling to get by, and these clawbacks mean they are literally making choices about whether they can buy groceries, they can pay their rent. Many people are unable to make ends meet. We've seen an increase in the use of food banks, and that is heartbreaking. There are people in our country right now, because of clawbacks to their GIS, those are vulnerable seniors, and clawbacks to the child benefit, these are families, that are not able to put food on the table. And it is a direct result of the Liberal government and Mr. Trudeau's decision to claw back the money that they need to survive. All the while, we know of many, many companies that took public support and misused that public support of the wage subsidy, paid out CEOs, paid out dividends. We've got many examples of companies that took public money and misused that money. Nothing is happening to them. There's no clawback. There's no attempt to get back those billions of or millions and millions of dollars from those companies, but vulnerable seniors and families that are struggling have been targeted by this government. That is callous and that is wrong. And what we're saying is immediately end the clawbacks, And absolutely, these families and these seniors should not be worse off because they needed help in the pandemic. And so they should receive the full amount of payment that they were supposed to receive this year. Absolutely. And that could be done immediately. There's no reason for a delay. There's no reason for this government to push this off. They could immediately fix this problem and save a lot of people a lot of heartache.
Thanks on that. And you mentioned earlier about the cell phone and internet fees, and also over the past few days. What is the specific mechanism for that? What are you suggesting the government could do to lower the fees? Because it seems that the Liberal government, by temperament, doesn't want to interfere with what they see as free market forces.
Yeah, they don't want to interfere, and the reality is we've got a monopoly in Canada of large telecommunication companies that are gouging Canadians. We pay some of the highest rates in the world, and there's no justification for it. So what we're calling for in terms of a specific mechanism is a mechanism that was used both in the United States to effect, as well as in Australia to great effect. And that is a price cap. What we're proposing is putting a cap on the amount that can be charged for both our cell phone services and our internet services. And that cap should be based on the average of OECD countries. This cap was put in place, a similar type of cap was put in place, both, as I mentioned, in the United States and Australia, and it immediately lowered the prices that people had to pay. That is what we're calling for. We've been gouged for too long. These large telecommunication companies have had a free ride. Putting a price cap in place would limit the amount that they could charge and immediately lower the cost for families. That's one of the steps that we're calling for immediately. And then there's longer term solutions. And one of those long-term solutions is also something that was used in the United States. It's to require that the large telecommunication companies must allow new entrants into the market to use their infrastructure, so their existing infrastructure, so they can have lower cost alternatives for Canadians. That alone would also significantly reduce the cost of cell phone and internet services. And then the final piece is there are currently some barriers for new entrants or lower cost options that they can't compete with, or they're not allowed to provide services when it's one of the pre-existing large telecommunication companies. Removing that barrier as well would allow these low cost alternatives to have access to more people, so they can have lower cost internet and cell phone services. So there's lots that can be done. Immediately put the cap in, and then there's longer term solutions.
Opérateur, prochaine question.
The next question is from Raisa Patel from the Toronto Star. Please go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Singh. I'd like to follow up on a question from my colleague David Thurton. As
Sure.
you mentioned, 2 members of your caucus have signed a petition calling on you to denounce the RCMP's presence on Wet'suwet'en territory, but that petition has also been signed by former MPs and former federal NDP candidates, including from the most recent election. Are you worried about some kind of split going on within your party?
No, it's clear that we've been very vocal about the use of force of the RCMP. We were critical of the RCMP and the use of force for a long time, the use of force of police in general. We've been very concerned about that. We're very vocal about that, and we've been calling for changes. And this Liberal government has done nothing to make those changes happen, despite promising to, despite making commitments to, and despite taking a knee. Mr. Trudeau took a knee at a Black Lives Matter protest and has yet to take a stand to actually change the practices to make things better. So that's a deep concern. And having spent time on the territory, met with people on the ground, met with elected officials from the Wet'suwet'en Nation, meeting with workers, meeting with different clans, meeting with hereditary chiefs, it's clear that there are differing opinions about what should happen. And that is clearly a result of colonialism. It's a result of governance structures and decision-making processes being broken down. And I want to be an ally in supporting the community's right to make a decision, but it's clear that there are differing opinions on the ground. And so we're focusing on making sure the RCMP are reformed, that seeing those painful images of violence should never happen. And we want to see this federal government play a role in answering serious questions around land and title rights. These are really important questions.
Okay. Minister, you mentioned differing opinions on this issue. Are those differing opinions happening within your party? And I guess I'll ask again, are you worried about some kind of split going on because of that?
No, I'm not worried. I know that New Democrats are concerned about justice for Indigenous people. We're all concerned about that, and we want to see Indigenous communities receive justice. We also know that settlers shouldn't be the ones making decisions for Indigenous people. That we need to support Indigenous governance and support Indigenous communities in making decisions. And it's clear that having spoken to people on the ground, that the position is unclear of what the right thing to do is. And I don't have the answer for that. I do know, though, that we can absolutely reform police, and starting with the RCMP at the federal level, to make sure we don't see the violence that we've seen for too long against Indigenous people, against racialized people. That's something we can do. We can absolutely push for more resources and supports for Indigenous communities to be able to develop their governance. That's something we can do. And the federal government has failed in a number of ways to deal with these issues, and we're going to push for those solutions.
Operator, next question.
There are no further questions at this time. Nous n'avons plus de questions pour le moment.
Possible de, vous pouvez juste poser une question sur C2, M. Singh, en suivi à mon collègue ici. Vous avez répondu sur les congés de maladie payés. Ça c'est dans C3, si ma mémoire est bonne, dans un autre projet de loi. En matière de C2, c'est plus aide pour les entreprises de certains secteurs. Pouvez-vous démêler ça pour moi? Est-ce que c'est possible que vous votiez pour C2 ou pour... Est-ce que vous pensez peut-être des demandes du Bloc québécois? Je ne sais pas si vous avez vu ce matin, mais on demande certaines choses comme une aide supplémentaire pour les artistes.
On s'est prononcé contre C2 parce que ça coupe l'aide aux gens. On est dans une pandémie. La pandémie continue. On a déjà dit qu'on n'appuie pas les décisions du gouvernement libéral de couper l'aide aux gens. S'ils veulent couper l'aide aux gens, ils ont l'occasion, l'opportunité de chercher l'appui des conservateurs ou des blocs, mais on a dit clairement on est contre ces deux à cause des coupures d'aide aux gens, particulièrement quand on est toujours dans une pandémie, particulièrement quand, avec le variant Omicron qui c'est une vraie menace à ce moment. Donc, on veut que les appuis aux gens continuent ou une réforme de l'assurance-emploi pour qu'ils puissent couvrir plus de gens. Parce que sans avoir un changement de l'assurance-emploi, on a plus de 60% des Canadiens qui n'ont pas de couverture dans le cas d'une autre fermeture ou des autres défis causés par la pandémie.
Rapidement.
Yes, of course, that makes sense. On paid sick leave, I've laid out that we support it, we push for it. On C2, in reference to the cuts to the supports for people in the pandemic, we've been really clear that we are opposed to that. We think it's the wrong thing to do, particularly given that the pandemic is still hurting Canadians. Numbers are climbing in some communities, and there's some real fear of what that would mean for people's jobs and their work. So we want to see supports continue to people. Or in the alternative, if there was a reform or a change of the employment insurance that covered more Canadians, because right now, 60% of Canadians have no coverage when it comes to employment insurance, and that's independent workers, that's gig workers that don't have any supports if they lose their jobs. And so without any change to the employment insurance, cutting the help to people in the pandemic is the wrong thing to do. And so we're opposed to C2.
Et très rapidement, sur les Olympiques, Jagmeet Singh, premier ministre, aurait fait quoi par rapport aux Jeux olympiques de Chine de 2022?
On appuie le boycott diplomatique, c'est important. On soulève les questions de droits de la personne et on continue de défendre les intérêts des gens.
David Burton again. Thanks for taking a second question for me. I think the crafters of this petition, Mr. Singh, just to go back to the petition, had a feeling that you would transfer blame for what the RCMP is doing on Wet'suwet'en territory to the federal government. The petition specifically says that Premier Horgan and the BC NDP government authorized the RCMP's presence. It goes on to say that the petitioners are further, dismayed and angered by the federal NDP statement in response to these events, which obscures the oppressive role the RCMP and the BC NDP is playing in this violence. So it doesn't really make mention of the federal government, the Liberals, being responsible for the RCMP presence on there. So are you obscuring who's really responsible for what the actions of the RCMP is doing on Wet'suwet'en territory?
I'm focused on my position, and I want you to know where I stand. I'm deeply dismayed by the use of force by the RCMP. I'm dismayed by the fact that the Liberal government and Mr. Trudeau promised to do something about it and haven't. I'm deeply concerned about the lack of action for police reform in general. I think this is a serious question. And having spoken with people on the ground, spoken with both or all workers, community members, elected officials, as well as hereditary chiefs, as well as elected chiefs, hearing from Indigenous communities, it's clear that there are differing opinions about what to do, and I don't have the answers about that. But I do know what we can do. We can reform the RCMP. We can support Indigenous governance. We can force this Liberal government to actually deliver on reconciliation. And that's what I'm focused on doing. Thanks so much. Merci.